Hello nerds, welcome back to Lore of the Worlds. I am so freaking excited to talk about the first mainline book in the world of Aragon to come out in over a decade. Quick heads up, there are of course going to be spoilers for the book Murtagh in this review of Murtagh, so if I were you and you want to avoid spoilers, go ahead and click away right now and come back after you're done reading. Without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about what Murtagh and Thorn have been up to and how Mr. Paolini's writing has evolved. I'll see you on the other side. Okay, let's talk about the character of all this, huh? First and foremost, this is a character book. While a good chunk of the book is devoted to building Algasia's lore, filling in the gaps in our knowledge therein, the better part of this text is focused on exploring Murtagh and Thorn's characters. So right off the bat, we get a very clear picture of the dynamic between the two of them, and just how different this bond is from Aragon and Saphira's. And while there is a humorous dynamic between the two of them, there is also a clear vein of trauma and pain that underscores their relationship as well. They've both seen each other suffer under horrific circumstances outside of their individual control, with torture and, cruel mind games being played on them near constantly while under Galbatorix's thumb. And indeed, much of their shared experience does seem to be defined by the actions others take for them. There is little to no agency afforded them before Galbatorix's demise. And the entire time, the writer-pair duo have been forced to watch from the sidelines as Murtagh's own brother, Aragon, gets to go off and play the hero. I do really feel bad for Murtagh here. Aragon was afforded pretty much everything that Murtagh ever wanted, while he was afforded none of that, through no fault of his own, mind you, or lack of trying. Aragon had a loving family to raise him, a dad that loved him, training from the elves, a literal physical transformation, the combined might of every single Eldenari inside the Vault of Souls backing him and guiding him along his journey, and, just repeating this for emphasis, a loving family. And at the end of all that, he got to be the hero and bring down Galbatorix. So is it really any wonder that Murtagh would have a little bit of a complex about his brother at this point? This is about the state in which we find Murtagh at the beginning of the book. Brooding, ashamed, low-key extremely jealous, and really looking to prove himself in the world. And more so than that, looking to prove himself as a force for good. So when Murtagh is told by an elder dragon to, stay the hell away from certain dangerous areas, is it really any wonder that that's immediately where he'd go looking first? Honestly, Murtagh is a bit of a pig-headed guy, right? So his instinct to jump right into trouble and then not contact Aragon when he finds it, strikes me as extremely in character. He wants to do things without having to rely on others. In fact, a really good chunk of his journey in this book is just that. It's learning how to rely on other people. He never really had anyone to rely on growing up, and even though he has Thorn by his side at this point, Thorn is little more than a baby by general dragon standards. Throughout the book, he is bluntly faced with the fact that he needs help several times, and it takes both he and Thorn being magically drugged and mind-flayed for a good chunk of time to realize that, hey, maybe I should figure out how to rely on others when I actually need help. But he does eventually realize that and utilizes the help of a fellow Urgal prisoner and a former cultist to escape from the grips of Bakel the Witch and the General Dreamers, killing Bakel in the process. And then from there, he flies off into the sunset, ready to do good, ending up in Illyria, formerly known as Urubaean, to live a life alongside the one human who understands him best, the Algasian Queen Nasuada. Overall, I'm pretty glad that we got this glimpse into Murtagh as a character. I was a little trepidatious going into this book how this would all fit into the overall story, but this gave a good bit of context to Murtagh and Thorn, really built up it built up the emotions surrounding these two characters. The book fleshed him out in a way that I frankly thought we never would experience, all while setting up the future of the series in a pretty interesting way. The biggest complaint I have about this book is just how easily Murtagh and Thorn fell back into abject servitude, right? They've been playing this game their entire lives, searching for freedom only to wind up literally enslaved, and it's hard to watch Murtagh's bullheadedness get in the way of listening to Thorn's very, very valid concerns, right? Hopefully Murtagh listens to him better in the future, and hopefully Thorn is more insistent on his own wants and needs. This was ultimately an entirely unnecessary ordeal for Murtagh and Thorn to go through, but Murtagh at least came out of it having learned a very substantial lesson, or at least we can really hope he learned that lesson. I do really feel for Thorn though, that the poor dude really just keeps getting it from all angles, and he's such a cool dragon. I want to know more about Thorn. Ultimately, the character work in Murtagh is going to go ahead and get an 8 out of 10 from me. Let's talk about the structure. We followed the dragon rider pair as they journey from Sunan to Gilead in search of the witch Bakel, and finally they end up at the far northern city of the cultist Dreamers. To me, the book very much feels divided into two separate parts. The first half-ish is a somewhat more whimsical journey to find the actual city of Dreamers, and the second half-ish is darker, occurring almost entirely within the city and in its depths. It's not like there's no overlap in tone here, but they do feel very, very distinct from each other, these two kind of halves of the book. I was a particularly big fan of the first section of this book, believe it or not. It feels like a bright and fun exploration of this world that we've only known through Aragon's perspective at this point, and it's a lot more whimsical than I had gotten from the Inheritance cycle. It really takes the time to explore various aspects of this universe from a new, fresh perspective, and I absolutely adored that. Frankly, I would have loved this book so much more if the tone of the whole book felt a little bit more like this. We get some good character moments between Murtagh and Thorn, some character work exploring their past misdeeds and the fallout within the context of their own lives, and a series of fun quests given by a weircat. It was really fun. I flew through this section, no pun intended, and I think that the building sense of dread throughout the section was very effective in setting up the rest of the book. Unfortunately, I don't feel like the rest of the book lives up to this standard, the first sort of half set. As soon as we get to Nalgorgoth, that's the city of Dreamers, the plot feels like it grinds to an absolute halt. Murtagh is just constantly making dumb decisions, and you as a reader are getting frustrated the entire time thinking like, dude, what the hell are you doing? Get out of there. Go call someone. Go call Aragon, you blockheaded idiots. What are you doing? Your dragon is like trying to get you to just go. But he doesn't, and the plot begins to drag down even further when Murtagh and Thorn are drugged and end up falling under Bakel's thumb. All sense of agency is completely removed from the story, which works from a character point, but goes on for far more of the book than is warranted. It really drags the rest of the book down quite a bit, and the whole time it's hard to feel bad for Murtagh in this. I hate to say it, but he really did kind of put himself in this position. Not you, Thorn. Never you, Thorn. You are perfect and were correct the whole time and can do no wrong. We stand Thorn. This is a little bit off topic, but I'm very much looking forward to hopefully a book in the Aragon universe that doesn't involve torture or long sequences of unfun kinds of drugs. Give me some of the fun drugs. Give me more of those herbal enhanced fail nerve scenes. I'm so freaking done with reading about Aragon characters getting drugged, tortured, and having to climb out of a hole somewhere. In this case, literally. Frankly, it's gotten pretty lazy, and I'm hoping that Mr. Paolini finds some better fantasy plot points going forward. In summary, the beginning of this book starts off with a lot of momentum that completely dies around halfway through. Right when they move to the more interesting location, too, which is incredibly disappointing. The novel also didn't feel anywhere as cohesive as I think it should have. I'm sure that there was a good way to tie the character growth and development throughout the book to the overall plot and structure, but this wasn't it. I think that a 5.5 out of 10 for plot and structure is more than generous. the lore. Let's talk about the lore potential here, huh? Okay, this is where we get into some really interesting discussion. This book was very obviously what I call a setup book, in the same way we might consider Rhythm of War, one of Sanderson's books, or a little closer to home, Brissinger. There are quite a few threads introduced here that won't pay off for at least another book, if not several, but these are some big threads that are going to get pulled in the next couple books, so I can forgive a little bit of clunky plotting to get there. It would not be the first fantasy book to spend more time setting things up than actually having a plot. I'm looking specifically at you, Middle Wheel of Time books. But what are we actually setting up, and was the setup itself any good? There are a few really big things to pay attention to going forward, some of which are less obvious than others may be. The biggest and most obvious plot point going forward is that of Azal Ghur, the pseudo-god influencing the dreams of those unfortunate enough to be close to its dream wells. They act through appointed speaker sort of people that they speak directly to, and those speakers form cults around the wells and themselves, all channeled through Azal Ghur. Also, Azal Ghur may or may not be a gigantic dragon whose spine is the spine, the mountain range spine. Included in these revelations is the knowledge that Galbatorix had some sort of involvement with the Dreamers. And while it's obvious that Galbatorix had contact with the Dreamers, including specifically Bakel, her claims that he was under the Dreamers' control ring incredibly hollow, and it's pretty certain that she was either lying, misled, or simply delusional. But Galbatorix was absolutely involved with them in some capacity while keeping his own goals and motivations. I'll have more to say on that in the future. Another really big thread to pay attention to going forward, and one that I particularly enjoy, is the relationship between Naswada, Murtagh, and the Empire. We have no idea how Naswada is managing to hold things together, if indeed she is, and the presence of Galbatorix's dragon rider and slave could have severely negative effects on her ability to rule, right? I could also go the other way, inspiring fear in the populace, but I don't necessarily think that's what Naswada is trying to do going forward, whether or not that would help cement her reign. I am very interested to see what sort of unintended effects this has overall. There is obviously a very legitimate reason Murtagh and Thorn left in the first place that hasn't really been solved by the end of this book, right? One really interesting thread that I haven't seen mentioned much is the running current of interspecial tension. So take the human-elf relations in Gilead, for example. It's very clear that the people of Gilead are nervous around the new elven population, but whether or not this begins to break into outright prejudice or even violence remains to be explored further. After all, elves have only been around for like 1 year total in living memory of pretty much the entire human race, right? Why would the human population trust random members of another mysterious race that have been hiding in the forest while the human populations are left to the whims of Galbatorix? Even if they had a good reason to not come help, they did kind of leave him under his will for over 100 years, and while illogical, that's not such an easy psychological block to get over ultimately, and this is just one example. I don't think this is an aspect that's going to get explored super in-depth in Paolini's books. I don't know necessarily if he wants to go there or not, but I do think that exploring it a little bit deeper in the future would be more than worthwhile. There's a ton more stuff that's getting set up here, and you can be assured that I'll be talking about it at some point very soon. You're probably not going to be able to get me to shut up about it, but how did this all fit together, and was it any good? Well, I think that some of it was very effective in building tension for the future, but much like the overall structure of this book, it oftentimes reads as pretty clunky. It all fits somewhat neatly with what we already knew, but many of the pseudo-retcon things with Galbatorix just kind of felt really unnecessary and in your face. I think a bit more subtlety could have been used overall, and this is me saying this. I wish the plot had been more heavily focused on rather than the lore setup aspects of it. Yeah, overall, the lore setups and reveals could have been more subtle. But Who knows? Maybe I'll be eating my words when the next book comes out. Maybe there's some 4D chess going on and there's some really interesting stuff being set up that I haven't caught. It would be far from the first time that I had missed some very obvious setup in fantasy books. For the time being though, the lore potential of this is going to be getting a 7 out of 10 for me. For our last topic of analysis, let's talk about dreams. I really wish the dreams in this book would have been a little bit more abstract. Like many aspects of this book, they felt very, very on the nose. I mean, maybe throw in a fractal or two. Spice them up a little bit, I don't know. They weren't bad, but they could have been better. This book's dreams get a 7 out of 10. So, to review. 8 out of 10 for character, 5.5 out of 10 for plot and structure, 7 out of 10 for lore potential, and 7 out of 10 for dreams. Overall, yeah, this was a fun read that was dragged down by clunky plotting, structure, and lore. If you love Murtagh, you have to read this book. You kind of have to. If you love Aragon and this original story, you should definitely read this book. But I don't know if it offers much for those that haven't been really invested in the series for a while, like me. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not really worth forcing yourself to read the original 4 books so that you can understand this one. But I also would not necessarily say that it's not worth it if those books seem interesting to you. Because yeah, there definitely is a lot of good stuff going on here. I think the best word to describe this all would be clunky. Thank you folks very much for tuning in. I've been Lore of the Worlds, and I'm off to go dream. Take care. Thank you folks for tuning in today. It's been a ton of fun putting this video together. If you enjoy what I do on this channel, I would urge you to consider supporting me over on Patreon. Not only does it directly support the channel, you also get early access to content, channel updates, previews, and much more. I will see you this time next week. Take care.